Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. And today, we're going to start our coverage to the south of Zaporizhia, the southern front, if you want to call it that, of the continued fighting within the scope of the war. So recently, we've received reports that the Ukrainian army, Ukrainian ground forces, conducted a limited offensive operation, most likely a reconnaissance in force, in the areas near Orikhiv and east of Orikhiv to the area near Polahi. We believe at this point it was multiple company-sized elements of the Ukrainian military. Again, we don't know if it was elements of the 65th Mechanized Brigade or elements of some of these territorial brigades that are positioned along the Zaporizhia area of operations. But nonetheless, a reconnaissance in force by Ukrainian forces occurred. The composition of this attack or reconnaissance in force was made up largely of Western armored personnel carriers. These were Dutch YPRs, very similar to U.S. M113s, older armored personnel carriers, really battle taxis, really designed just to get troops from point A to point B. In this case, they were used in open fields, in direct, again, what looked like offensive operations by the Ukrainian military directed towards Russian-held areas. Now, we know in at least one incident, up to 4 of these YPRs, these APCs, were engaged and destroyed by Russian forces. Now, each of these vehicles will transport, they will have 3 crew members and up to 7 infantry inside of the vehicle. So we don't know how many Ukrainian infantry were in the vehicle, or if it was just a light reconnaissance element in each vehicle. But we know multiple vehicles were destroyed, at least 4 in one incident, and continued Ukrainian operations against Russian forces in this area has ceased for now. We're not seeing any form of reconnaissance in force or any other offensive operations by the Ukrainian military. Now, as we go to the east, in terms of what is happening in Bakhmut and areas near Bakhmut, we have a fairly interesting developing situation. Obviously, we continue to see large amounts of Ukrainian forces in this Bakhmut pocket, but things could be developing that could be more concerning for Ukrainian forces that we have not talked about yet or have really looked at very, very closely. And I'll talk about that in a second. It's to the north of Bakhmut, near Siversk. But again, this pocket continues to tighten. In and around Bakhmut, we continue to see 1, 2, 3, 4, about 5 Ukrainian brigades in Bakhmut, and then you have a multitude of Ukrainian brigades to the west of Bakhmut as well. So keeping this pocket open to the west is the this unit here, the 67th Mechanized Brigade, along with to the south, the 80th Air Assault Brigade, and these battalion elements of the 80th Air Assault Brigade run along the southern sector of the conflict, intermixed with the territorial defense brigades as well. But and then to the north, you have the again the 67th Brigade holding the northern part of the pocket or cauldron open as Ukrainian forces remain trapped in Bakhmut. It's quite possibly the Ukrainians are slowly pulling these forces out, but I think at this point the Russians are looking for a mass capitulation of those Ukrainian units in Bakhmut. So we'll have to see how that develops. Now, to the north of Bakhmut, near Krasnohora. We're seeing mostly Wagner units fight near Bakhmut, but near Krasnohora, along the M3 highway pushing to the north-northwest in this area, we are seeing regular Russian military formations. So if you look just to the north of Soledar, you see what could be a developing pocket of Ukrainian forces. If you look how this runs, again, just north of Soledar, and then we run north all the way towards Kreminna. And you'll see here in this area you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, essentially about 10 Ukrainian brigades that are operating to the east, north, and south of Siversk. And if you, again, we're seeing military movements by the Russian forces pushing along the M3 highway out of Krasnohora here. And then to the north, we also see a significant buildup of Russian forces as well. We see at least 3 to 4 Russian divisions that could be preparing for large-scale offensive operations, possibly in the summer when things start to dry up. So what could that do for these Ukrainian forces that are near Siversk? Well, we could see some sort of double envelopment operation by Russian forces, again pressing to the northwest out of Krasnohora here. This will be the southern flank of the Russian operation. Again, it may be initially pushing towards Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, but as it pushes towards the M3 highway, and if it achieves a breakthrough, we could then see this force pivot to a north-northeast maneuver. At the same time, we could see these Russian forces, these multitudes of Russian divisions that are building up in this area, including, but not limited to, the 76th Air Assault Division, elements of the 4th Tank Division, and the 145th, 44th Motorized Division as well. So it'll be interesting to see what exactly happens in the coming months as we continue to see this Russian force group continue to build up, again, near Kreminna, and then continue to see Russian operations near Krasnohora. And again, we believe at this point the Russians could be looking to come down in this area near Kreminna on the right flank of Ukrainian forces near Siversk, and these forces here near Krasnohora to the left flank of Ukrainian forces, or would be the Russian left flank near Siversk, thus creating this double envelopment of Ukrainian forces near Siversk. So we're going to watch this very, very closely. Obviously, we continue to hear about both sides talking about offensives and counteroffensives. We hear this from the Ukrainian side. We hear this from the Russian side as well. But the way things are developing, at least right now, it does appear that the Russians are preparing for some sort of operation with the goal of enveloping and destroying these Ukrainian forces near Siversk, both to the east, north, and south of Siversk, and then possibly putting pressure on at the same time Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. Now, we don't anticipate that this operation by the Russian military will kick off until they have wrapped up things in Bakhmut. And obviously you have very well dug-in Ukrainian forces in Bakhmut. It's just the problem for the Ukrainian military is it's very difficult to supply those forces in Bakhmut. We believe most of these roadways have been cut off, and the Ukrainians are essentially supplying and getting in very limited supplies to Ukrainian forces along some of these very, very muddy man-made roadways that have been created over the course of the conflict. Now, we have heard reports that the Ukrainians have a column of Ukrainian ground force personnel to the southeast of the Bakhmut pocket, and could be looking at conducting some sort of operation to try and relieve those forces. Now, we hear that from the Ukrainian side. We've heard Ukrainian content providers on YouTube talking about, well, this could be the start of a Ukrainian counteroffensive, looking at relieving Bakhmut. I don't think they're there to relieve Bakhmut. I think they're there to try and rescue the soldiers from Bakhmut and get them out and allow this area of the pocket to remain open prior to it being cut off by Russian forces. Now, that may happen, and I think the Russian intent is to seek capitulation of those Ukrainian brigades in Bakhmut. And then post Bakhmut, at least right now, it looks like the Russians are eyeing Siversk and creating an even greater pocket of Ukrainian forces to the east and within the area very, very close to Siversk, again, pushing northwest of Soledar and Krasnohora, enveloping this route, and then pushing to the southwest of Kreminna with these Russian divisions as well, and eventually meeting up with this Russian force here, cutting off Ukrainian forces near Siversk. But we'll see what happens in the coming weeks and days ahead. Obviously, this is probably an operation that will take place in mid to late summer at this point. In terms of the prospects of a Ukrainian counteroffensive, at this point, unless the Ukrainians are rapidly resupplied by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, Western countries, the United States, the likelihood that the Ukrainians are going to be able to mount a successful counteroffensive someplace within the battlescape is going to be very, very difficult to do, given the casualty rates that have taken place and given the lack of supplies that the Ukrainian military right now is facing. Just a point to note, as we talk about these Ukrainian brigades, such as this unit here, the 77th Air Mobile Brigade, elements of the 80th Air Assault Brigade. We call these units elite units of the Ukrainian military. We identify them as air mobile or air assault brigades. The reality is that these units do not have an air mobile or airborne capability at this time. That capability has been lost both because of Ukrainian helicopters being destroyed and Ukrainian aircraft being destroyed. The Ukrainians right now don't have the capability of conducting vertical envelopment operations or airborne operations against Russian forces. Compounding that, many of these forces, many of these Ukrainian forces that belong to units such as the 77th Air Mobile Brigade, we've seen 100% turnover in these forces. And these new soldiers that are reporting to these air mobile brigades have just received basic infantry training. A lot of them have not, or none of them have received, these new soldiers have received airborne training or air assault training. They just haven't done it. They don't have the capability to do it right now. So to call these guys air mobile units, yes, it speaks to their lineage, but the reality is these Ukrainian forces don't really have a airborne capability. Now, I would say that these the Ukrainian units belong to some of these special forces regiments, like the 8th Regiment of Special Purpose Forces. That probably still retains some sort of airborne capability, air assault capability. But by and large, I think many of these airborne regiments and brigades that we are speaking about being the cream of the Ukrainian army. I think they were the cream of the Ukrainian army, but again, because of what's happened through the course of the last year, most of these guys have become casualties, and they've been replaced by new green soldiers who have no airborne or air assault training. So that's kind of where we're at for today. We will continue to watch. We will continue to report. Thank you for joining us today. More to come very, very soon. And as always, have a good day.